I don't talk much about my professional life on the channel, but for those of you who don't know, I am a recruiter for one of the large tech companies here in the Bay Area. And this week, my company officially announced that they were going to lay off a lot of employees. If you're like me, you've never had to work through a recession until now, or you've never worked at a company where you've actually had layoffs. So I thought I would make this video to explain how it went down at my company so you may know what to expect if it ever were to happen to you. And I thought it would be helpful to also share some lessons that I learned and some things that I picked up along the way so that maybe you can prevent yourself from getting laid off. To be honest, I can't really say that I'm surprised that my company announced layoffs because when you look at the rest of the tech sector and all of the large big tech giants, everyone has pretty much done layoffs at this point already. So it should be relatively expected that the companies who hired the most during the COVID pandemic are probably going to need to downsize or right size, as they call it, right now. As you can tell from the title of the video, I was very fortunate and was not laid off this week, but I still went through a roller coaster of emotions. Even though I wasn't laid off, I still felt depressed and down for most of the day when it was announced, and as you learn about your colleagues and friends who were unfortunately laid off, it is still pretty sad. Firstly, my thoughts and prayers go out to those who have been laid off recently or have been affected by what's happening in the economy right now. I know it is not easy, and economists are saying that it is going to get worse before it gets better. So first, I figured I should explain how my company handled these layoffs. And I do work at a very large tech company with over 150,000 employees. So do keep that in mind as a caveat because I'm sure every company of different sizes is going to handle layoffs differently. I typically start off my workday around 8 a.m. Pacific time. And so when I logged in the morning, I saw that there was an email announcement from our CEO that was sent 2 hours ago at 6 a.m. Pacific time. And basically, you found out if you were laid off via email. Corporate access has been cut off, and you should receive a separate email notifying you if your job was impacted and if you were being laid off. After reading this email, I immediately scrolled down through my inbox to see if I received a separate email, and thankfully I did not get one, which meant my job was safe. Now, we were not given a list of which employees were affected, and there was no way to actually tell because our HRIS system didn't update in time, so you wouldn't actually know who's still here or not. And the only way to find out if someone was impacted is by messaging them. So for most of the morning, most of my colleagues were just messaging people trying to see if they would respond to you or if your emails would get bounced back. The news about whether or not you were laid off and who was laid off was not delivered to us by our managers or even our manager's manager. All communication was done via email, and it seemed like our managers were not consulted on who was going to be impacted and who would get to stay. Since my company is over 150,000 employees, I personally feel like this actually makes sense as the best way to communicate this type of information. I know it's a very impersonal way about doing it, but because we have so many employees across so many different time zones working in so many different functions, it would be difficult for managers to deliver the news all at the same time and to do it in a way that wouldn't seem biased or make it feel like it was the manager's fault. So I do believe that sending it this way actually give managers a lot more breathing room because they can comfortably tell these people that they were not a part of the decision factor, because you wouldn't want to stay and work for a manager who had to let some of their good people go or some of your employees and friends. So it makes sense that you would want it to be as impartial and as removed from your immediate manager chain so that you wouldn't feel so impacted and negative towards your manager if you were fortunate enough to stay. Now, this is just how my company handled layoffs, and I've heard stories from friends who work at other companies of different sizes that their layoffs were handled much differently. One friend told me that there was a random meeting from HR that popped up on everyone's calendar at the very last minute that said it was very important that you must attend this meeting. And you would log into a meeting and there was basically two separate meetings. One meeting, they announced that if you're here on this phone call, your job is safe. And at the other meeting at the exact same time, another person from HR said, unfortunately, if you've dialed into this call and you were invited here, your job has been impacted. So every company will choose to handle their layoff announcements differently, but the main thing that I've heard is that it's pretty abrupt and most people don't really see it coming. When I read the email in the morning, I just remember thinking to myself that this couldn't be real, and I tried to refresh the page and see if it was still there, and I could feel my stomach turning over and I felt a little sick. And even as you're scrolling down your inbox to see if you received the email, whether or not you have a job, it's almost like time stops and you're holding your breath the whole time. And even though I learned that I wasn't impacted, you still feel really down and uneasy because there's this lingering feeling or this cloud that hangs over you now because you don't really know if there's going to be another round of layoffs. And if there is another round of layoffs, are you going to be impacted this time? All that we were told is that those who were laid off were done at an executive level through a spreadsheet which was anonymized. And the main factors that they looked at were performance, productivity, time in role, and criticality of the role, or whether or not your project or what you were working on was important for the long-term growth of the company. Even though you know your job is safe for now, it's still hard to have faith in your leadership team when you don't really know why it's happening and if it's going to happen again. Now, there's nothing really that they could do from their perspective because they don't want to cause mass panic, and they also may not even know if they need to do another round of layoffs. A lot of it's probably going to come down to what the financial performance is of the company. So if you're watching this and you're wondering, well, how do I prevent myself from being laid off? Well, I think one of the key takeaways is that if you are a very high performer, there's a very low likelihood that you would be laid off. Also, you're going to want to make sure that you're working on the most critical components for your company or for your products. If you're working on an experimental division or within a fun startup or within a division that does not generate profit, you may be at risk. I would consider switching internally or maybe working on a different team or a different product where you know that you would be prioritized. Or if you are the primary revenue generating product or function for your company, you would most likely be safer. Also, since all these large tech companies are doing layoffs, you can probably expect that other industries will most likely follow soon as well. So you should start proactively networking, planting seeds, and seeing where other companies are that you would want to consider working for. This has just been my personal experience as to how my company handled its layoffs. Don't know if it was done the right way or the wrong way. Why don't you put down in the comments below how your company handled layoffs and what you're doing to re-enter the job market. And if you want tips to help you get a new job, I've got a whole playlist on my channel dedicated to interview prep and other videos that can help you get your resume ready. Thank you all for watching, and don't be afraid to shake things up if you feel like your job is potentially at risk.